First of all, thank you very much, Pete and the team, Gisli, Helga, Danny, Steph, for inviting me out here. It's a great privilege to be here in Iceland and also to interact with so many great minds in the research world. It's been fascinating to sit here and listen. Unfortunately, I don't have too much to add about the salmon, but hopefully I can interest you in our project in Africa. Maybe just a bit of history before we start. So we very recently became an NGO. We have been doing behind-the-scenes work for probably the last 3 years in a relatively unstructured way. We work in particularly southern Tanzania, and we work mostly in recently turned hunting areas. So towards the end of 2019, the previous president of Tanzania converted about 9 national parks from hunting areas into national parks. In Tanzania, if it's called a game reserve, it's hunting. If it's a national park, it's not hunting. And we previously targeted, with the support of Sir Jim, some of these hunting areas, but we had very low success in being approved to go into those areas and stop hunting. It was kind of frowned upon. And then, with a stroke of genius from the previous president, who unfortunately passed away, we saw our opportunity and worked with our partners in Tanzania with the National Parks Authority, and we are trying to develop these parts of new national parks which have no revenue stream whatsoever, and coming up with solutions to prove their value to the government so that they are better protected. All right, so I think you've got a little bit of the background there. So there are 3 great savanna wilderness areas left in Africa, which are continuous wildernesses that are not fenced. If you look at a lot of the parks that you probably know about, Kruger National Park, Okavango, these are either physically fenced or very much fenced by humans. And so the last continuous great wildernesses, savanna wildernesses left in Africa are Nyasa land in northern Mozambique, all the way through southern Tanzania to Lake Tanganyika and down into northern Zambia. So that is kind of the last big wilderness, intact wilderness areas for the savanna wilderness left in Africa. So our mission is to protect, restore and preserve wilderness areas and increase the wildlife population again so that the flora and fauna can be enjoyed for the generations to come. So this is kind of where we do most of our work. This is the Nyerere National Park over here, which was previously the Selous Game Reserve. The total area is about 56,000 square kilometers, and National Park is now about 33,000 square kilometers. And this is Ruaha over here, and we're working in the Usango Game Reserve, which is about 6,000 square kilometers, which is a hunting. It was a game reserve, which has now been incorporated into the national park. So I think what's been interesting for what sets us apart here is these 5 pillars, which I think a lot of conservation organizations have, but we have actually sort of lived through them by stumbling through mistakes in many ways. So we found a wetland in Usangu. No one was going there. It was a recently hunted area with a lot of illegal activity, and we decided that we would like to go and try and find out what was in that area. So we did a very rudimentary biodiversity audit of the area using the Tanzanian government. So our approach is to work with the government and make it their project and bring in resources wherever we can to try and build capacity within their organization. So we started with research. We did some large mammal colorings. You can see some lion coloring on the right there. We did roan antelope and sable antelope. And after the first year, we had 2 different incidents where the collars pinged a mortality ping to us, and we went to investigate, and we found 2 poisoning incidents, which I don't have pictures of. I don't think it's necessary to share them, but they use a poison called temic, which is a pesticide used in agriculture. It's available over the shelf, and the nickname for that is 2-step. So animals drink that, and literally they take 2 steps and die. And we found leopards, lions, various antelopes, baboons, birds from the biggest birds to the smallest birds, all just lying around there. And we suddenly realized, geez, we better do something about protection. So we started to then move more into the protection side of things. And with that, we found a lot of illegal activities, and we were moving people out of the out of the parks, and realized then that we had to develop a community strategy as well. And then the obvious sustainability is the desire to make it pay for itself, and wildlife restoration comes into the bigger picture. So now we're moving into the Selous, which, as I said, the Nyerere National Park is. So this whole area here was the Selous. The pink part is the new national park. Our new project is between those two rivers over there. This is the Great Ruaha River and the Kilombero. And why the Selous? Well, it's one of the biggest wildernesses left in Africa. The entire area is about 56,000 square kilometers, as I mentioned, but there are also many WMAs, which are wildlife management areas, surrounding that. So the total area is probably more like 80,000 square kilometers. From our research approach, really what we are trying to do is establish some baseline biodiversity. And we are just starting in the Selous, so please excuse me if I don't have lots of graphs and things that can show results as of yet. But really what we are trying to do the research for is, well, first of all, to understand the areas, and it helps us develop a potential tourism revenue model. But secondly, to also look at the biodiversity accreditation. I think there's been a couple of mentions about biodiversity accreditation possibly becoming something of significance in the future. And so we're kind of guinea pigging ourselves a little bit on latest technologies in order that the government really understands what they have, and so that should biodiversity accreditation come, that they would be able to reliably gain that revenue. And that's really the kind of sweet spot that we're looking for, is where biodiversity accreditation and tourism work together to create really good revenues for the areas and therefore ensure their protection. So we're using camera trap surveys. We're just starting this year with some bioacoustic surveys, particularly for insects and birds. Aerial census obviously helps. We're using a variety of different remote sensing, mostly through GPS satellite collars. Localized trap surveys like Sherman traps, etc. And then we are working with Joe. Joe, I see you didn't have us on your presentation there. I'm a little bit disappointed. But we're working with Nature Metrics to do the eDNA. And we figure if we can do all of these things really well, we should have a good grasp of both the aquatic and the terrestrial biodiversity within the areas that we're working. This was some of our original camera trap studies. You can see we found all of the animals here, including some of the ones that we don't really want in national parks down there, the cattle on the right. And in this survey, this was in Ruaha National Park in Usangu, we found every single species that was on the species list for the national park, and we actually have recently included two new species, a small antelope called a grijsbok, Sharp's grijsbok, and a Meller's mongoose, which have never previously been recorded within that national park. Bioacoustics, as I mentioned, this is quite a new thing for us, and we hope to particularly focus on insects, birds, and bats with this technology. Aerial census, so this is the Usangu wetland. Fantastic wetland. It's actually about a 20,000 square kilometer wetland, but only about 3,500 square kilometers are inside the national park. But obviously, I think we all know how important wetlands are. Some of the remote sensing that we've done just recently, you can see Sir Jim over there. The top, this is a crocodile. We have a little satellite tracking device there, which has a little solar panel on it as well, so we're testing that to see the longevity of that. And we just did one experiment with the tigerfish, but this year in October we hope to put on 20 of these radio tags, which are similar to the ones, thanks to Gisley and his team for the guidance on our strategy on trying to track these fish. And both of these are the first two types of study of their kind in East Africa. And as you can see here, these are all people working for the Tanzanian Wildlife Research Institute. And we'll bring outside experts in to build capacity and teach them how to do this on their own in the future. This was a very interesting lion study that we did. So these are two different individual lions in our first study area in Usangu. This gentleman over here is called Thor, with the red dots, and he has about a 2,500 square kilometer territory. And this size of these territories is about, I think it's 30 times the size of a territory of a Serengeti lion. And only exceeded in size of territory in two places in Africa, in the deserts of Namibia and in the central Kalahari. And we've been asking ourselves why he has such a big, or both of them actually have very big territories in an area that has really quite a big abundance of prey species. And the only conclusion that we've really been able to draw is the large volume of illegal human activity in the parks. I think these lions have to just keep moving because they're constantly being harassed by humans. And that's sort of something that we're developing, and it'll be interesting to see if their habitats shrink now that we are getting the humans out of the national park. This is that big crocodile that you saw over there. His name is Jim, and he's been sort of swimming up and down the river over here. We have some, so these sensors obviously tell us location. They also tell us depth that the crocodile will go to, and also time spent underwater. This particular crocodile has spent 4 hours and 34 minutes under without coming up for a breath, which I thought was fascinating. When I was a guide, I used to tell all of my guests it was about an hour maximum, and I've realized that it's way more than that. And apparently in very cold water, they can stay underwater for up to 8 hours, which is pretty interesting stuff. So countries with high biodiversity like Tanzania are aiming to be leaders in working towards halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity by 2030. In this particular area, we have 18 species of antelope, which is a really high number of different antelope. And the biodiversity is in very high numbers, but also quite unknown. A lot of these areas, and no disrespect to any people from the hunting fraternity, but they are not that interested in the smaller stuff. And so by us focusing on the smaller things, insects, birds, aquatic vertebrates and things like that, we think that there's probably quite a lot of undiscovered species within the areas of our work. So this is what we're doing together with Joe and his team from Nature Metrics. I think Joe showed you earlier how they sort of map out the potential hotspots over here. What's very interesting for us is we go through protected areas. So these are hunting blocks up here. This is Ruaha National Park, and we're looking at all of the tributaries of the Great Ruaha River. It goes through a hydro system over here, which will be quite interesting information. Another hydro dam over here, and then a big sugarcane monoculture estate in here, which we have good cause to think that there's potentially some pollution going into the river, and then into the national park. And from here, they're busy constructing a new hydro dam, and potentially we might be some of the people that are able to measure changes in biodiversity from the construction of a hydro plant in the present system as it stands. So really quite an interesting study. And then all the way down to the Rufiji Basin over here, which is a very critical area to the whale shark population. There's a massive mangrove forest down there which has an algal bloom that attracts the whale sharks every year. So hoping to find some very interesting aquatic information from these different areas. Again, the DNA, I think Joe's explained quite a lot about it, but for us, it's really about trying to understand what is in these rivers. It's a little different to probably some of the rivers you work in. There's no chance for snorkeling and investigating what's potentially underneath there. It's quite dangerous. We have I think the Selous has the highest density of Nile crocodile in any place in Africa. And so we really believe that the eDNA sampling is going to be of great value to our study and to the development of these areas. So that's really much our approach, to better understand the biodiversity of southern Tanzania, to protect and develop these wilderness areas for future generations. I think I left a bit of time there for some questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Brandon.
Sure.
Great.